In the 80s and 90s, cable TV was the Wild West. You could flip through public access channels at 2 a.m. and see really strange stuff. They weren't produced TV shows, just regular people doing whatever they wanted on camera. There's this one show I discovered in 1990 that still sticks with me. I've asked hundreds of people since then, and no one else remembers the show called The Midnight Psychic. I probably shouldn't have watched it. It definitely wasn't for kids. When I first saw The Midnight Psychic, it was a Friday night in July, and I was having a sleepover with my best friend Megan. She was staying at my house all weekend while her parents were away. I still remember I was wearing my Hard Rock Cafe t-shirt from when my family visited New York City. I think I saw John Stamos there, but I'm not 100%. Anyway, the night started out normal. Megan and I were laying on the floor in our finished basement playing Girl Talk. It was a board game where you answered embarrassing questions or did dares like calling your crush and hanging up. We'd made a pact to stay up all night. I don't know why that's a thing teenagers think is cool to do. Late at night, we watched TV. My family just got cable, so if you set the television to channel 3, then you could use the box to flip around on basic cable. Back then, a cable box had actual buttons that clicked when you pressed them. You could find some really bizarre shows late at night on the higher channels, like public access shows where people dressed up like Star Wars characters and took live calls. But the strangest thing of all happened when we switched to channel 37. That's where we found him, the Midnight Psychic. It was just a man sitting at a table covered with a white cloth. He wore glasses and a dark suit. There was a single overhead light that made shadows on his face. The way the camera was positioned made you feel like you were sitting directly across from him at the table.
Welcome, believers. You're watching The Midnight Psychic. I have revelations to share tonight, but I have to warn you, you may find what I'm about to say frightening. If you believe the world is explained by science and logic, then you're about to be uncomfortable. I will challenge what you think you know about how the world works.
I'd never heard anything like this before. It was creepy and exciting at the same time. For the next 15 minutes, we watched as the Midnight Psychic told us about his gift. How he'd been a skeptic until the night he predicted his uncle's passing 3 days before it happened. How sometimes he woke up from dreams soaked in sweat because something or someone was trying to get through. Then he straightened in his chair and his eyes focused on something we couldn't see. He said he was receiving a message. He closed his eyes and pressed his fingers against his temples. As he did that, I felt cold and climbed inside my sleeping bag. I still can't believe what happened next. The psychic claimed there was someone with him, a young man who'd been trying to get through for months. He described seeing a blue Honda Civic with a Save Ferris bumper sticker.
He's trying to tell me about his music. He says everyone knew his car because of how loud he played My Prerogative every morning. He thinks it's very funny that he always did that. He says you could hear it from 3 rows away in the school parking lot.
My stomach dropped. Megan's hand found mine in the sleeping bag. That was Derek Matthews' car. Derek, who'd had a car accident in April. But then the psychic said something that made me burrow deeper into my sleeping bag. He described Derek's accident in detail that had never been in any news report. How Derek had been changing a cassette tape while driving on Route 9, and the tape slipped from his hands and fell to the floor. Derek reached down to grab it and didn't see the delivery truck coming through the intersection. He claimed Derek wanted us to know it happened fast. The psychic stared into the camera with this intensity that made me want to look away. He said Derek wanted his friends to know he was okay, that from wherever he was now, he could see everything, and that he wanted to protect the people he cared about. Then he pointed from his forehead toward the camera and said,
I predict I'll see you tomorrow.
The next show started. We sat in complete silence. I felt like I was underwater. My parents' footsteps upstairs seemed far away. Finally, Megan whispered what we were both thinking. That was Derek. The details about the bumper sticker and the Bobby Brown song were so specific and personal. We'd intended to stay up all night, but we must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, the room was bright and I could smell pancakes cooking upstairs. That morning was surreal. The rational part of my brain scrambled for an explanation. I looked at my mom humming while she flipped pancakes, and at my dad reading the sports section. It wasn't worth telling them. I knew they thought TV psychics were just grifters and fools. Until last night, I would have agreed. Megan and I didn't discuss whether we would watch The Midnight Psychic again. We both knew we would. Because if Derek was really trying to communicate, if he really could see everything from wherever he was now, what if he had more to tell us? That Saturday night, we counted down the hours until midnight. Around 10 p.m., we made an Elio's frozen pizza and tried watching Batman, but neither of us could focus. Megan kept checking the clock on the VCR every few minutes. At 11:58, we turned to channel 37. We sat cross-legged on the floor, barely breathing as the digital clock ticked toward 12. Exactly at midnight, there he was again, the Midnight Psychic.
Welcome back. I've been expecting you.
Megan grabbed my arm. Do you think he can see us? I shushed her, leaning closer to the TV. The Midnight Psychic said Derek was back, that the young man from the night before had returned, but this time he was desperate to get a message through. The psychic pressed his fingers to his temples, wincing like he was in pain.
He's showing me water, becoming very agitated about it. And a boat. He's shaking his head no over and over.
My heart started racing. I thought about the annual July 4th boat party at Crystal Lake next weekend. It was the biggest social event of the summer for kids our age. Then the psychic said something that made my skin crawl. He said Derek was reciting a rhyme. That childhood poem by Shel Silverstein about what ifs that our whole class had memorized in elementary school. It starts out like this. Last night, while I lay thinking here, some what ifs crawled inside my ear and pranced and partied all night long and sang their same old what if song. The psychic was parroting the familiar verses about lying awake worrying. But when he reached the end of the poem, he didn't stop. The psychic's voice sounded exactly like Derek as he delivered a final warning. What if the captain has too many drinks? What if the holiday cruise boat sinks? My stomach was in knots. Then the Midnight Psychic was back to himself. He said the message had been delivered and made that same gesture, pointing from his forehead toward the camera, and said,
I predict I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
The next show started. Megan immediately turned to me and said, we can't go on the 4th of July fireworks cruise. Derek's trying to warn us. My heart was pounding as I wondered if we were really going to turn down the most fun summer event. I wasn't sure yet. The invitation came 3 days later. Annie Michael called on Tuesday night to tell us we still hadn't paid for Saturday's fireworks cruise. She reminded us that Crystal Lake would be packed with party boats. Every teenager in town would want this opportunity. I looked at Megan, frantically shaking her head from across my bedroom. I made up an excuse about a barbecue at my uncle's house in Connecticut and said we couldn't go to the lake this year. Annie couldn't believe it. After I hung up, Megan and I sat in silence. We just turned down the social event of the summer based on a warning from a no longer alive classmate who's been channeled through a cable access psychic. Were we losing our minds? The next 4 days crawled by. Part of me wanted to call Annie back and say we were coming. But every time I considered it, I heard Derek's voice. What if the captain has too many drinks? What if the holiday cruise boat sinks? Saturday, July 4th was clear skies with a light breeze. Perfect boating weather. Megan came over early and we spent the day trying to distract ourselves. We went swimming in my backyard pool and ate hot dogs. We were just trying to avoid thinking about what might be happening at the lake. Around 9 o'clock, the fireworks were scheduled to start, and my dad turned on the TV to see the show. The breaking news banner caught our attention. A cabin cruiser had capsized at Crystal Lake, carrying 34 passengers. It overturned half a mile from shore. The reporter mentioned drinking as a suspected cause. Dozens of kids were hospitalized. The camera showed parents crying and the Coast Guard boats sweeping the dark water with searchlights. Ambulances lined the shore. Annie Michael appeared on screen with wet hair wrapped in a blanket. She described how the boat just flipped without warning, how dark and cold the water was, and how she thought she might not make it. The Midnight Psychic was right about everything. The captain had been drinking. The boat had capsized on July 4th, exactly as the warning predicted. And Megan and I were safe in my living room instead of being terrified on Crystal Lake. We never told anyone why we didn't go on that boat. Explaining it made us sound nuts. The next Friday, we tuned into Channel 37. The Midnight Psychic was gone. Instead, there was a show called Future Famous. It was a corny talent show with people doing bad karaoke and magic tricks. We never heard from Derek again. I guess he'd done what he came to do.